So let me just share with you how it went as an expert witness. So I was hired as an expert witness from an attorney out of Chicago. And how he found out about me is he found my YouTube videos. He liked what he saw, said it made a lot of sense to him. So he gave me a call and he asked what I thought about this case. So he had a case that this patient was still having problems. They were hit from behind going 40 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, and wasn't getting any better. And he said, is there anything, what am I missing here? Nobody can find out what the problem is. So he asked me my opinion. So I asked him just some of the basics. Well, bottom line is he went to, right after he got hit, he went to the emergency room. They did a CAT scan, blood test, EKG, everything that's not related to essentially the neck. They're just going to do a gross evaluation, make sure you're alive. So then they let him go. They send him on his way. He's still having problems. So within a relatively short period of time, he goes to his medical doctor, his general practitioner. So what does his general practitioner do? The same thing. Static x-rays, EKG, blood test, nothing wrong with you. Take this medication. Continues to have problems. So about this happened in September. So around February, he accidentally goes to a chiropractor, and it's like anything. When you keep having problems, you keep looking. So eventually, he goes to a chiropractor, and I looked at the chiropractor's notes, and they were just terrible. Um, there was nothing used. As a matter of fact, in the narrative report and the trial deposition, I didn't use anything relative to the chiropractor. They basically took a full spine AP picture and drew. It was classic chiropractic 1950. They drew imbalanced lines. It was typically a subluxation chiropractor, and so he got a little bit of help. He didn't go that much. He felt better when he got treated, but he didn't. The chiropractor didn't even put him under an intense treatment program. They were seeing him, I think, twice a week, and this is already 6 to 8 months after the injury. So he's already in the middle toward the end of the repair phase of healing. So he continues to have problems, and then he goes to another doctor, and they refer him to pain management, and then pain management wanted to do nerve ablation, burn the nerves, injections, and others. You get to a much more serious procedure with burning the nerves, and that scared him. Not many people are going to be up for that. So that's where he stood. So he'd been at roughly 5 different medical providers for a chiropractor and still had all these complicating problems. So that's when I get the phone call. So I basically found out that nothing was done. There was not a typical or a standard neuromusculoskeletal spinal examination done. There was no motion x-rays, nothing like that. So I explained to the attorney all that. And so we had to get him to a provider that could document this. So it just so happened one of my clients was in Chicago. So we sent them over to the client. And so he did all the normal personal injury documentation, range of motion, overpressure, joint motion, motion x-rays, all that stuff. And he had two he had two ligamentous spinal lesions. One was 10.52 millimeters of angulation in a motor unit. So he was 0.48 millimeters off of the 11 degrees AOMSI. Another spinal unit, he was 1.57 millimeters translation. And so we did the whole workup, and in the narrative report, took it through the whole, of course he had associated, he had 4 major hybrid findings: foraminal compression, shoulder depression, overpressure, active range of motion. He had his subjective findings. He had his mechanism of injury. He had 7 injury magnifiers, and then he had 3 or 4 objective findings. He had the translation angulation. He had an osteophyte. An osteophyte had grown within a year and a half later. So he had an MRI a year and a half later, and now there's an osteophyte where at the time of the accident, when he had a CT, it was not there. So that was huge. And obviously that's due to the stress of abnormal spinal biomechanics. So we had that as evidence. And then we had a positive dynarom also. So he had ligamentous lesions, osteophyte, positive dynarom. Is as far as his findings. So he had all these categories. That was a real solid documentation case. So we go up and do the testimony, and they don't even offer him to pay his medical expenses. The person that hit him, insurance company, did not even offer to pay fully. They offered him a little bit. I think they offered him like $10,000, something like that. His medical expenses, I think, were like 28,000 roughly. So they did not even want to cover his medical expenses. This is how bad these insurance companies are. And it was obvious. It was that, person hit him's fault. We're talking 40 miles an hour now. We're not talking about 5 miles an hour. We're talking about a major collision. So he has to sue them because they won't work with him at all. So that's how the lawsuit came about. And then I go up and testify. So and I had to teach the attorney the 25-step lesson, the 25 steps of what he needed to ask me in that order. So we do a lot of preemptive strikes. We do a lot of questions to establish credibility, and from personal credibility to chiropractic's credibility to covering a lot of preemptive strikes that we already know they're going to do. And then from there, we go right into the mechanism of injury. We go right into this 12-step formula, and there are very specific questions in order that I trained him to do, and why. And of course, he loved it and made a lot of sense to him. So, but I had to train him. So these are the questions you're going to ask, and this is why you're going to ask, and this is how it's going to come together. So it went from when we started into the case, it went from the mechanism of injury, it went to the injury magnifiers. We had to explain, anatomical failure. We had to explain coefficient of friction, defenses down, whiplash effect, all these things. And then from there, we went into subjective, hybrid, and objective findings. We had to explain MMI. What is MMI? We had to explain the 3 phases of healing, and then any complicating factors we put in there, and then his response to care. We covered that, and then so we're going through in detail, step by step, and I'm explaining the 3 phases of healing to this jury, and the jury loved it. They were all paying total attention. They were all writing notes and everything. I mean, so we're explaining the 3 phases of healing and why he has no pain with some movements, and then as the pain increases with other movements relative to the mechanism of injury. So that went off tremendously well because they're not used to that. And then they've never heard that before. And then and you have to cover that because you have to be able to explain that, why somebody has pain in some areas and why they don't in others. So we covered all that: increased nerves, nerve sensitivity, nerves being trapped, collagen strength, collagen elasticity, and then we personalized it to the patient. And then so that took us to MMI, which took us to the impairment rating. And so I gave him a 25% impairment rating. And I explained to the jury how it was justified because it was so close to 3.5, but also he had 2 segments, not 1, and he had 7 injury magnifiers. So that wasn't a big deal at all. So now that impairment rating gets to be very important, not just for the impairment rating itself, but for how to determine the pain and suffering injury award, which is real important. And I'll cover that. Matter of fact, it's fantastic because pain and suffering is one of the hardest injury awards to explain, but I've really dumbed it down and made it simple and logical. So anyway, we go from um, now we go to the impairment indexes. Well, now they understand when we go to the impairment indexes why he can move forward. In his particular case, he can move pretty much all the way forward and to the left and to the right and to the very end. His main problem was bending his head backwards. When about halfway backwards is when he went halfway and kept going. That's when the pain started increasing and increasing, etc. So we explained all that, and we went through several of the major activities of daily living indexes, and then I explained why, based on the timeline, why he would not have pain constantly from the start of doing dishes or laundry or sleeping to the end. Because remember, it varies, depends on when they go into active, passive range of motion, or active, and how much. So I explained that in great detail with relative to these ADLs. So we were real good there. And remember, that's the two most important categories, the impairment and the pain and restrictions with ADLs, thoroughly explained and documented. So we had all the evidence. So that went good. That's the impairment indexes. Then we go to the prognosis and need for future care. And there is when we use the formula for need for future care, but also there is when we explain spinal degeneration and the phases of spinal degeneration, what's that based on? And then from there, the progression of altered spinal biomechanics and how it ultimately leads to the #1 disability in the United States. And eventually, in his case, in my opinion, he's going to need cervical fusion down the road because he's only in his 50s and he's got this problem. So there's a good chance down the road he's going to need cervical fusion in that segment. So that was the prognosis, need for future care, and then there was no pre-existing. He had some mild degenerative changes, and remember they'll always try to minimize the case with pre-existing, and so we nailed that down by going into, even though he had some mild degenerative changes at the point of the accident, at no time did he get any treatment or have any problems relative with his neck. So we had a good history of him never taking prescription medication, or going to a doctor for a neck problem. So that really wiped out any potential pre-existing argument. So we're sitting pretty good. Let me go to the injury award category now. So there's 3 potential injury awards. And remember, you have to know your state. Each state has their own potential injury award. So, and how, and what the criteria is. Now, this was in Chicago, and so the injury awards that essentially they had was, was medicals. That was 1. 2 was pain and suffering, and 3 was need for future care. Now, the problem in Illinois is you cannot do a per diem with pain and suffering. So I'm like, okay, well, we had to come up with another way, because you can't just throw a number out there, because that's what he goes, he goes, well, like, I was talking to an attorney here in Florida, and he goes, well, we measure it by, how intense the injury is. And we just put a dollar amount on it per day. And I go, oh, and then we multiply that, over the life expectancy of the patient. And I go, well, what's that based on? He goes, well, it's not. I said, well, you can't do that then. You can't just randomly pick something without any justification. That's a great way to create a defensive reaction. So you can't do that. So it made me put together a method, and actually I'm actually going to start teaching it because it makes so much sense. And so let me walk through the injury award and how that was, and how we tabulated that. So we the medicals were easy, right? Medicals are real easy. You just have to find the medicals, add them up, no problem. That's probably the easiest of the injury award. And then the need for future care was relatively easy. We'd established all the main factors, injury, mechanism of injury, subjective, hybrid, objective. I mean, it's all solid that, yeah, he did have this problem and it was going to need care. And I suggested about every 10 days to 2 weeks. And I explained physiologically why it's like that. And typically why he needed treatment, and usually about 10, and then I explained why, and about every 10 days to 2 weeks, it starts getting worse and worse and it builds. So I explained the physiology of that. So we're looking pretty good there. So we explained why he needed the chiropractic adjustment for helping with the spinal biomechanics, the altered spinal biomechanics, and how it affects the nerves and the gait theory. And I simply explained the gait theory to the jury. I explained Wolff's law to the jury. I explained Davis's law as it relates to soft tissue. When I went into the spur, I explained Wolff's law. When I covered spinal biomechanics, I used Panjabi and White and clinical biomechanics of the spine. When I used the impairment, I used AMA guides. And what was that based on? See? And I sourced everything. It was just me. I didn't hand over any sheets of paper or anything like that. I was just explaining to them. So we got the medicals pretty good. Now we go to prognosis and need for future care injury award. And now remember, that's going to be bigger. And he's in his late 50s, and an actuarial scale listed him at another 21 years of life. So we justified the chiropractic adjustment for his pain and biomechanics. And then remember, he had a positive dynarom, and I forgot that in the objective category. So remember, in the objective category, he had this osteophyte, he had the 2 lesions, and he had the positive dynarom. And so it was a really solid case there. So so that was explaining the muscle spasms, and then also the firing of the muscles and the increased nerve sensitivity. It was explained in the 3 phases of healing. So that's how we supported therapy, the necessity for muscle therapy, like massage, as another therapeutic protocol. So we had all the data behind it. So there we are. The medicals were easy. We go into the need for future care. We laid the groundwork with the 12 categories real well. And then we explained each of the therapies, and the therapies that we suggested were 4. One was the chiropractic adjustment, and we explained that relative to nociception and pain firing and the gait theory and helping with altered spinal biomechanics. And then also how it would help to some degree decrease the aberrant firing to the muscles. Then we went into the dynarom was supported with them. So the 3 phases, the increased nerve sensitivity of the 3 phases of healing, which was supported by the dynarom, that was the need for muscle therapy. So we put in massage. That would be a muscle therapy that would be needed at that frequency every 10 days to 2 weeks. See, we're tying everything back to reality. It's not pie in the sky. And it can't be. It's got to be real. So from there, the third therapy we said was elasticity. And that was based on the science of the 3 phases of healing, how the collagen tissue is only 70% is elastic. So we explained how that worked, because we've already explained, that happens. And so that would be another form of therapy that he would need. It would be some active therapy, what we call stretching therapy. So those were the 3 main therapies that were going to be necessary for the need for future care. And then I added in, and I pretty much do this with all my patients, I add in anti-inflammatory supplements instead of medication. And so I explain how ibuprofen, Motrin, how bad that is when you take it long term. And I explained how it's totally fine if you just take it for a little while in the inflammatory phase. Of course, that's for credibility. But now we're talking about the rest of his life. So do we want to be taking ibuprofen every day the rest of his life? And I explained why. No, that would be a really bad idea because it creates ulcers. And then aspirin is responsible for 20% of kidney disease and kidney failure. And then there's the over-the-counter NSAIDs that inhibit collagen synthesis or the healing process. And then if you take prescription drugs, you have to worry about the side effects with the kidney and liver of prescription drugs. So I explained it. I covered all this explained. And then, of course, that's why I said that's why I always recommend anti-inflammatory supplements. And they essentially include supplements, herbs, things like that. But there's one particular anti-inflammatory supplement that I like that has 7 different supplements and herbs that are all anti-inflammatory, and it seems to work really well. And so that's how we established the need for future care that totally related to his condition. And so that came out to the need for future care came out to around $90,000, something like that. So his medical bills were tabulated around 30. That was easy. And his need for future care came out to 90. So now we got pain and suffering. Okay, how are we going to put that together? And this was really smooth how we did this. Matter of fact, I'm going to just start training it in. It's so smooth because this is one of the problems that the attorneys have trouble explaining. It's like hypothetical and it's in the air. And I'm like, you can't do that. You can't. And then you can't just ask for a large number. You can't just ask for, well, we want 5 million or we want 1 million, Then it creates a real defensive reaction. So I explained to them, I said, no, we've got to take that jury step by step to where we bring them to the number that we want. It has to be logical. It's got to make sense. You can't just throw a number in the air. So he understood that. So I came up with this method and it's really good. So here's how we came to pain and suffering. And remember, what's important with pain and suffering is activities of daily living. So here's what we did. We took a chart. And by the way, we created visuals for all this. Everything I'm telling you, we created blow-up poster boards. So every time I covered something, we went right to the poster board to show it. So we had great visuals. And the same here. What we did is we created a chart of the ADLs. So we put the ADLs on the left-hand side, all the ones that he filled out with the impairment indexes. And then we put on there, was he having pain? Yes or no. Was there restrictions? Yes or no. And what was the functional capacity index? 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, or 3. Real clear. So if you can imagine on the left-hand side, we listed all the ADLs. Then we had 3 separate columns. Was there pain or not with that ADL? Was there pain or was there restrictions with that ADL? And what was the functional capacity index of that ADL? Well, we already had those because that was part of the documentation that I made sure got done. So we had a nice clean chart. And we had some ADL, and again, for credibility, you don't want everything just to be, yeah, it's bad, 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 3, 3, 3. You can't do that. And for credibility. So what we did next is walk through. We walk through each of the ADLs. So here we are reminding the jury again. So now remember, we already covered this in the impairment indexes when I was explaining why he does or does not have pain in certain activities of daily living and which range of motion does he have it in. And I tied that right back to the 3 phases of healing and the repair phase, etc. So it's all beautifully connected. Makes total sense. And it's great visuals. Okay. So, and again, I had to teach the attorney all of this. They don't know this. I had to explain it to him and walk through it to him and train him and all that. So I had to sell the attorney first to make sure, so he totally understood that this is the order that we're doing it and why we're doing it this way. which reminds me, when I finish this, let me make a comment about the opening statement and closing statement, because that's essentially the opening and closing statement. So, but going into this third potential injury award was pain and suffering. So we've got a lot of background here. Now they know the three phases of healing. They know the different categories of nerves, increased nerve sensitivity, increased number of nerves, nerves getting trapped in the collagen. Collagen's only 70% as strong as elastic. And what's that mean to the patient? And specifically this patient relative to each one of those ADLs in which specific motion, forward, backward, left, or right. Okay, so we're sitting real good. So now we're going for pain and suffering specifically. So we bring the chart back up and we walk through it. We walk through them, reminding them again, because you have to. So we go through every 80. I'm not saying he did, but I trained him to do this. I created the chart and then I trained him how to teach the chart to the jury, because he had to stair step the jury from zero to whatever money he wanted, and it had to make sense. Okay. So there's all the ADLs, and I think we had 15 or 20 of them on the table there. Some of them were more important than others, and then some of them he could do more of or had no problems, and some of them he had some pain and restrictions, and there were a few of them that he just couldn't do anymore relative to his activities of daily living, relative to the neck injury. One of them I remember was bow hunting. He couldn't pull back the pressure. It takes a lot of pressure to pull back on a bow. He couldn't do that with his neck injury, so he couldn't bow any. And the importance of that is his hunting with bow and gun was responsible for 50% of his food, of his family's food. See, this was important stuff. This is what I dug for. This is what we got out. So anyway, getting back to the pain and suffering. So what we did is showed again, so we went through all of those categories, went over if he did or didn't have pain, went over the restrictions, and went over the functional capacity index, reminding him. Okay, so now we got tremendous backdrop of how it all comes together. Mechanism of injury, injury magnifiers, three phases of healing, the nerves involved, the connective tissues involved, how it relates to motion and his ADLs. Great. Now, how do we convert that to money? Okay, and then remember, what is the single most important thing that, and I had to teach the attorney this, what's the single most important thing for an injury award for a jury? Empathy. Empathy, emotional empathy, not cognitive. It's empathy. And so we needed, that's why we went to not just hunting. Hunting wouldn't have much empathy. Matter of fact, it may even turn some people off that are against hunting. But now, when it was responsible for 50% of his food on his table, see, now that's empathy. That was real important. So we made sure that he knew the high marks. What were the empathy high marks for this particular case? He was a pilot also, and he had significant restrictions with piloting in his plane. As a matter of fact, he had his own plane. He couldn't push it out. He couldn't pull it out or push it back in anymore because of his neck pain. So he had to have help to pull it out of the hangar. It's just a little two-seater plane. So anyway, so how did we tie it to money? So we got all the emotion, we quantified all the categories of the ADLs emotionally with pain, etc. And so what I said, because remember, we could not do a per diem in the state. Now, if you can do a per diem, that's even easier to do a per diem. You could just match it to his income, or for per day, extrapolate that out, over the rest of his life, and you'd be pretty good. In other words, you have some real numbers to deal with. But we couldn't do it. They wouldn't allow a per diem in Chicago. So I said, well, here's what we'll do to tie it to money. As I'll say, well, he's got 21 years left. He's got roughly 20 ADLs here that he has pain and restrictions doing. And I said, we would suggest that as a bare minimum, it's probably worth it's probably worth $100,000 or more a year to not have these problems. In other words, who would voluntarily take $100,000 or $200,000, have all of these pain and restrictions the rest of their life for 21 years? See, that is tying the money to the problem now. And then what we did is I said, as a matter of fact, he's got 21 years. And so we would suggest over 21 years that that's easily worth $1 million to not have these problems. I don't know who would take $1 million to have these problems. And it's the negative phraseology that kind of brings it home. Now, you can't personalize it to a jury. You can't do that. So it's got to be third party abstract. So we said so we went to $1 million. So we went to 100,000 to 200 a year first. So what we did is we stair stepped the money up and then brought it back down and watch what happens. So we go, over 21 years, it's probably safe to say, if it's 100,000 a year or 200,000, it's probably safe to say it's not worth $1 million over 21 years to have to suffer with these permanent problems the rest of their life. As a matter of fact, it's probably not worth $5 million. And to be realistic, I don't know who would accept $10 million to have all these pain and restrictions with all these activities of daily living the next 21 years of their life. That's what we did. So we brought it up to 10 million. And then we brought it back down. So we said, so we're gonna suggest that as the bare minimum. So we brought it up to 10 and then we came down to 1. See, now 1 million over 21 years does not create a defensive reaction because we stair stepped it from 100,000 to 200 a year to 1 million over 21 years to 5 million over 21 to 10 million. So that's kind of what's called a thermometer close. You take them up. So we took them up to 10 million, tied it to the 20 ADLs, the pain and restrictions. Then we brought it back down to 1 million on purpose because now it wouldn't create a defensive reaction. And $1 million over 21 years. Now, if you said $1 million over a year, that might be a little bit more of a defensive reaction. But when you say you're going to have 20 different ADLs with these pain and restrictions over 21 years, and there's probably nobody that would accept $1 million to have that. See, that just sounds logical. Well, that's what we did. But we didn't even ask for $1 million. So then I said, what number are we going to justify? So we got a target number that does not create a defensive reaction, $1 million over 21 years. And then I said, then you ask for the percentage of $1 million. And what percentage of $1 million are we specifically going to ask for that we've already established? 25% impairment rating. So then you're going to say, so we're going to suggest that because of his impairment rating, and remember, we've already substantiated that impairment rating. So we're going to suggest that that for the pain and suffering injury award, that because his impairment rating was 25%, that you allow for 25% of $1 million or $250,000. How much sense did that make? That was tremendous. That was an unbelievable stair stepping. And remember, pain and suffering is the hardest one to justify. So that came out to what was that? $250,000. So you take the 250 for pain and suffering. So now we're just adding them up. So he's got 250 for pain and suffering. He's got 90 for need for future care. And he's got 30 for medicals. How much sense did that make? See, that's how you put the injury award together. You've got to literally emotionally stair step the jury and take them to each money figure that you want, or you won't get it. And you're the one that has to explain this to the attorney because most attorneys don't know what I just shared with you. Now, when I explained this to him, he loved it. I said, well, this is how you're going to ask for the pain and suffering injury award. And then he goes, that makes total sense. Love it. And then I had to explain him to basics of, basics of sales, how we had to stair step with $100,000 a year, which took it up to, 100 to 200, which took it up to $1 million. And they go, okay, you got to go past the $1 million. So let's come up to 5. And then you have to tie these 20 ADLs that he has pain and restrictions with to that, which we've already substantiated, and then take it up to 10. So we're trying to take it up to 10 to psychologically bring him up. So when we come back down to $1 million or ask for $250,000, it seems like a ridiculously easy number, as opposed to if he'd have just set out of the chute without any substantiation and jury, we'd like $250,000 for pain and suffering. Well, now it seems like a lot if you didn't stair step them up. But now when we stair step them up to 10 million and then we come back around and substantiate only 250,000, that makes it sound so easy and smooth. And that's what happened. So this was the number, I forget the total number that's on that he asked for, but it was a little over 300. So I was 330, 350. What was it? Was it 250? It was, these are the numbers. But anyway, the final number came up to, I think, 330, 350, something like that. So let's see, 25. Yeah. So, and then I told him, I said, you're over 300. Now remember, they only wanted to offer him $10,000 for medicals and his medical. Then that's it. They didn't even want to pay 100% of his medicals. So that's how we easily got to asking for $300 something thousand. And even if they don't pay 50% of it, you're still at $150,000. And I told him anything over $100,000, I'd consider a success, you know. So that was how that turned out. It's still there's still debate. The jury still has the case right now. Now let me just point out how I trained him how to do the opening statement and the closing statement. You know, they have their own ideas. And I said, well, you know, whatever it is you do, this needs to be in your opening statement and it better be in your closing statement. I said, basically, you better say to that jury, we're going to show you 12 specific steps. And these steps are going to show how this injury occurred and why it's a permanent problem and the capital that we're requesting at the end and how it should be reimbursed at the end. And jury, here's the steps. Here's what we're going to show you. Now, this is the opening statement. We're going to show you the mechanism of injury and then explain what that is. Then we're going to show you what's called injury magnifiers, and we're going to explain what that is. Then we're going to show you the subjective findings, brief statement of what that is. Then we're going to show you the hybrid findings, what that is. And then we're going to show you the objective findings, and that's based on MMI and brief explanation of what that is. And then we're going to go into any complicating factors. We're going to go into the therapeutic protocol. And in other words, we explain each of the 12 categories with a real short statement after it, just a brief, just kind of telling them what that is, because they won't know what's an injury magnifier. So it's just one or two sentences real quick. So we told them how this is going to come in front of them. This is what's going to be laid out in front of you. And he loved that. Well, then we go through it, and now we're going to do it. We actually go through it. That's the step that we're going to go through those 12 steps to put this case together and support it. Well, that's what the whole case did. That's what we did for the whole case. That's what all the witnesses were for. And of course, I was the main, I was the expert witness for the case. And then that's exactly what we did. And then the closing argument is, we told you at the beginning we were going to cover A, B, C, D. And then you tell them we showed the mechanism of injury, blah, blah, and then the facts relative to that. We showed the injury magnifier, and here's the facts. We showed the subjective. You get the point. So now that's the conclusion. And then he goes into adding up the money, like what I just said. Medicals is easy. Prognosis and need for future care was relatively easy, and which correlated directly to what we just covered. And then we taught, the hardest one was pain and suffering, and I just explained how that is. And so he ends up saying, basically, we told you what we were going to tell you. There's the 12 steps. We did all 12. Here they are. Here's the 3 categories of reimbursement. This is what we would like for you to return and why. And turn it over to the jury. That's what happened. Now, who taught him all that? I did. You're going to have to do it. Your attorneys will know bits of it. And remember, it totally depends on the attorney you're working with. If you're working with a C attorney, you're going to have to teach them everything. A B attorney, you're going to have to kind of bring in at least half of this information. But you're going to have to explain to this attorney. And remember, what is the single most valuable thing you can do to increase your referrals to your practice is to know how to do what I just covered with you. Remember, it is not the positive findings of the case that matter. What matters is that you know how to put the whole case together regardless of the findings, but you know how to look for them and you know how to interpret them and connect all the dots. Never forget, that is always your ultimate message, not if the person did or didn't need surgery or injections or have a lesion or whatever. That's the value that you bring to the table. That's how you get the referrals, because not many people at all can do what I just covered. And when you can do it, and it's not even close, it's not even close. Like I told you, he went to a chiropractor. We did not include, I went through the chiropractor's notes. There was absolutely nothing, zero in their notes that I could include. Nothing. That's how bad their notes were. So that's the process. One last thing that happened that was really interesting. So on cross-examination, we're feeling pretty good how we pieced this case together. So on cross-examination, what happens? Well, this is the first time in so many years of practicing and being a witness and an expert witness, the insurance company did not go after me for not one clinical question. They did not challenge not one clinical question. You go, well, why is that? It was so tightly packaged and explained. He couldn't go after any clinical questions. So here I am, the expert witness, and he doesn't challenge not one clinical question of what I just covered for 2 days. I was on the stand a total of probably one full day. It was a half day. It was an afternoon one day and then all morning the next. So that was about 5 to 6 hours, something like that total. So remember, when they can't challenge the clinical aspect of the case, what do? Well, that's when they come after you. And that's what he did. He just came after my credibility. That's it. He couldn't do anything about it. And that was it. Case over. And so I knew when he didn't challenge anything clinical, I'm like, no, we wrapped this up really tight. There was nothing that he could do clinically. So, all right, wanted to share that with you. Any questions?
Hey, Paul, I have a comment.
Yeah.
I think they didn't want to cross you on any of the clinical stuff because if they had, your attorney gets a chance to ask you another question about what they challenged you on. And I have a feeling that every time you speak, you're hurting their case against the patient. So I think they didn't want you on the stand at all. They knew it. Every word out of your mouth was going to hurt them.
Well, I would agree with you, but I will tell you, I'm going to get the transcripts and I'm actually going to make a book out of it because my deposition or my testimony was phenomenal in how I stair-stepped the jury, literally just stair-stepped them. And what was interesting is they still had these plastic things up from, the COVID and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were behind the stand, it really created a disconnect with you and the jury and everybody else because there's this big plastic thing, in front of you and all that. And it was like, fortunately, we had these blow up pictures. So he put a picture up. So for me to explain I had to go to the whiteboard. I had him have a whiteboard so I could explain the 3 phases of healing, and we had the pictures. Thankfully, I went up to the whiteboard to started explaining, and now I'm literally in front of the jury. It's like a little spinal workshop.
Mhm.
I'm literally right in front of the jury, nothing interfering us. And that went so well. I'm like, oh my God, this is great. The connection I was having with the jury versus being behind that plastic wall.
Yeah.
Well, the defense attorney knew it. So as soon as I finished that one topic, the defense attorney jumped up and said, "Hey, Honor, can you have him sit down now?" Well, I knew I did that because I was connecting unbelievably well.
Right.
And so the judge turns to me, and I knew what was going on. The judge turns to me and says, "Are you done?" I said, "No, I still have several pictures to go over." And I did that on purpose because I didn't want to go back behind that guard. I was
Uh-huh.
up front, right in front of that jury. It was literally like uh, a spinal workshop in your office. It was that tight knit with no barriers. It was fantastic.
Right. Hey, I know you're going to make a book out of that testimony, but I was wondering if there's any way you would share the testimony. I'd love to read that or listen to it to hear how you did it. But
Yeah, I'm gonna make a book out of it, but I'm gonna make a video of it. I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna go back over it and read it and counter read, and so you can actually hear it live.
yeah, I'd love to hear how
Yeah.
just how you actually did that, put it
Yeah,
all
I don't
together.
have the visuals. It's obviously it'd been great if it had been videotaped because we don't have the visuals of me pointing out, the different pictures we used and the wide erase board and all that. But the sequence of how we built it is exactly like what I teach you guys.
Hmm.
I mean, it's exactly what I teach is exactly what I did, step by step.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear it.
Yeah. But
Thank
it was amazing. So when he didn't ask me not one clinical question, I'm like, he couldn't. It was too well packaged.
Right. Well, did he get you on being, when he attacked you, what did he get you on? Anything?
The only thing that he attacked me on was, believe it or not, he just went after my website. And actually, this was kind of interesting. They always try to get you on, there's common things they try to get you on. And I cover that. I'm going to cover that when we go over how to do depositions and trials and all that. But one of the things they always try to get you on is how much money you're making because they try to make you look greedy. And then they try to make it look like the outcome of the case is dependent on you getting paid is dependent on them winning. That's what they try to do to
Right.
make it look biased. Well, I charged below average. Matter of fact, the other chiropractor in the area charged twice as much as me. And I flew in from out of town. So it made me even look more credible. And I gave them a flat fee. So it made it look really inexpensive. And it had already been paid in full. So I had a real low fee and it had already been paid in full. And it wasn't dependent on this case at all.
Right.
But what they did is they just went into my website and just said, "Oh, you see here, you teach how to stop IMEs, and you teach chiropractors how to become millionaires, and just trying to make you look greedy and all that. That's all."
Right. How do you handle you get paid depending on the outcome of this? If you're the treating chiropractor, and let's say you've got an $8,000 bill and it hasn't been paid because it's a contingency, how do you handle, well, doc, if the testimony today is successful and you win a big lump sum for your client, don't you get paid? How-
Yeah, I don't want to go too far. I mean, that deposition cross-examination is a topic in its own.
So you'll be talking to us about that?
Yeah, so there's very specific questions you can expect when you're cross-examining them, and
Mhm.
I cover that when I go over how to do the trial testimony.
Okay.
That's part of it because we already know what they're going to ask. All of this is all real common what they're going to do.
Right.
But the point so we're going to cover all of those, what are the common areas they'll attack you with the case? What are the common areas they'll attack you professionally? What are the common areas they'll attack you personally? And those are what are called preemptive strikes. So we want to cover all of that before they do, so we can cover it and make it look in a lighter, not as bad.
Right.
So that we cover all that when we cover how to do depositions and trial testimony. But the short answer for your particular situation is if you did have a lien and it wasn't paid, the simple answer is, well, the payment is not dependent on the outcome of this case.
Mhm. Just
That's
leave
it.
it.
Yeah, it's just a bill. It's not dependent on the outcome of the case at all, because you're gonna bill whether they win or not.
Right.
I mean, even if they lose, they're still responsible for the bill. So
Mhm.
it has nothing to do with the case, the outcome of the case.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You just associate the case from them personally being responsible for it. I said, well, no, they're responsible for it. It has nothing to do with the outcome of the case. That's irrelevant.
Mhm. Okay.
But it's softening. It's knowing how to soften blows. It's not like you're going to totally blunt every blow, It's knowing how to soften their blows. That's
Mhm.
all.
Yeah.